Subscribe to The Honest Critique for current affairs, movie, book, and product reviews. Also, make sure you press the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload a new video. The views, information, or opinions expressed during the video series are solely those of the individuals and do not necessarily represent those of The Honest Critique and its employees. The following video contains strong language which may be offensive to some viewers. Viewer discretion advised.
Hello and a very warm welcome. I'm delighted to be joined by Nitsana Darshan-Leitner, who is an Israeli attorney and human rights activist. She is the founder of the Shurat Hadin Israeli Law Center and the author of the book Harpoon, Inside the Covert War Against Terrorism's Money Masters. So thank you so much, ma'am, for taking your time and speaking to us. Firstly, I wanted to give our viewers a little perspective of what the situation with the hostage crisis is. We have seen a rough figure about 150 to 190 hostages being taken by Hamas, and we haven't had any updates whatsoever in the last 1 week or so about the situation. Could you tell us a little bit about what the situation is currently?
Yes, well, as the entire world knows, on Saturday, 12 days ago, during a Jewish holiday, Hamas terrorists attacked Israeli communities around Gaza and murdered over 1,400 people. They did it with brutality and cruelty that cannot even be described. They raped women and girls. They tortured parents in front of their children. They beheaded, they amputated limbs, all in the most inhuman way. Those who remain alive were kidnapped to the Gaza Strip. Children, women, elderly people. Hamas is holding more than 200 people in Gaza. This is considered to be a war crime, a crime against humanity. And most of the hostages are not soldiers. There are civilians, women, children, babies, all people who are held by Hamas in Gaza. Hamas does not provide any information about them. We don't know if they are alive or dead. We don't know if they are wounded. We saw in pictures and films and videos that some of them got shot before they were kidnapped. And there are people among them that depend on medicine. There are 8-month-old baby among them. Now, according to the Geneva Convention, the Red Cross is responsible for receiving information about prisoners or hostages in armed conflicts. The duty of the Red Cross is to check the condition of the captives, their health, and to go and report this to the other side, in this case to Israel. But the Red Cross refuses to act. It refuses to turn to Hamas and to demand to see the hostages. They don't do anything to help them. And this is not the first time the Red Cross turns a blind eye against the condition about the Israeli hostages. If you are aware, there was a soldier held by Hamas in captive for 5 years. His name is Gilad Shalit. Not once the Red Cross went and checked on his condition. And today, since 2014, for almost 8 years now, Hamas is holding 2 Israeli citizens, which the Red Cross have never checked on, have never gone and visited, doesn't give any information to Israel about them.
Ma'am, especially in this case, it's critical that, as you're mentioning, over 200 people are held hostage. What's the excuse of the Red Cross not acting on it? I remember having spoken to one of the family members whose son was actually taken hostage and he needs emergency medication, like an inhaler, and he doesn't get it. And she was literally asking for international cooperation and support. So if just the international community doesn't step up when there are 200 people taken hostage by a terrorist group, what's the excuse that they are giving?
Well, in the beginning, when we approached them, they said that we in Ratnadeep They say that they don't work in Gaza. But an hour later, we saw the Red Cross in Gaza complaining about the situation of the Gazan citizens and saying the same, alleging that there is a humanitarian crisis in Gaza and the nation should get involved. So they are working in Gaza. They have presence in Gaza. They just refuse to go and check on the Israeli hostages, claiming now that Hamas simply doesn't let them. But the Red Cross is a part of the United Nations. He receives his duty according to the Geneva Convention, the same way the UN and the nations of the world make sure that Israel goes by the rules, obligates the Geneva Convention, applies all humanitarian conditions on its prisoners, and make sure that Israel does not commit war crimes or crimes against humanity, does not attack civilians, does not violate the rights of the prisoners that she's holding. The same way the UN and the other nations of the world are putting their eyes on Israel, they should put their eyes on Hamas. Hamas is a bloody, bloodthirsty organization that did the most horrible crimes since the Holocaust to Jewish people, but not only Jewish. Among the hostages, there are foreign citizens from England, from United, from Europe. There are civilians from 20 different countries. When Hamas took this brutal action, he declared a war against the entire world, not only against Israel.
Ma'am, and this is what I want to actually continue this conversation with a couple of last questions. One of them is actually about your work, where you've represented hundreds of terror victims in legal cases, and you've also been active in taking down social media resources on such as Facebook, where a lot of terrorist content is there. When you saw those visuals, TikTok videos floating in and being circulated, what was your first reaction? And when you go and talk to these victims who have been persecuted, brutally murdered, what are you doing actually to help them actually, if you could tell it for our audience?
So first and foremost, we can go after those who are responsible for this massacre, which is the Hamas organization. Then you go after those who supported it and aided and abetted it. Talking about Iran that funds Hamas and supports them. Talking about Qatar to recruit people to go and join them, to raise funds. They all do it on the social media. And we've seen these horrific, horrible videos which Hamas took during this massacre and spread out all over the social media, mainly on TikTok. We file lawsuits against these different organizations, and our cases reached the Supreme Court of the United States. And as I said, we are going to sue each and every one that is involved in this massacre and everyone that helped them along the way.
Yes, ma'am. The last thing that I want to ask you before I let you go is, how can we actually force the international community to act regarding the hostage crisis? Because over 40 different nationalities, hostages are from 40 different nationalities, are actually in custody of a terrorist organization. And the international community is turning a blind eye. So how can we force the international community to engage in the hostage crisis, especially if some families who are watching this interview, whose family might also be under the custody of Hamas?
Absolutely. What Israel needs to do is to go to each and every nation, whether its citizens are captured by Hamas or not, and show them these terrible videos and show them how cruel and brutal that organization is, how subhuman it is, and warn them that if they don't stop Hamas, which is equal to ISIS. Next, they will be in line. Israel is just the barrier between the savage in the Middle East to the rest of the world. Israel collapsed. If Hamas was free to carry out acts of genocide against Israel, a day will come, Hamas will carry out this policy against the entire Western world. So they better jump in and do anything they can to help Israel eliminate Hamas and to help Israel release this hostage.
And since you mentioned this, it's very important that the humanitarian assistance as well, the economic assistance that's going to Hamas as well. If we see, a day before yesterday, there was a tweet by a UN body which mentioned that Hamas has stolen necessity oil that was kept, actually energy resources that was used for the emergency purposes were being stolen by Hamas people. And a fight also is happening where economic assistance or financial assistance has been used for terror funding. How can that also be stopped, where a lot of countries want humanitarian assistance to go to Gaza, but Hamas take it for granted and use it for terror activities?
But this is a problem. This is why Israel refused to provide Hamas with any material aid and not even humanitarian aid, because there is no obligation, according to the international law, for you to provide anything to your enemy. You don't have to help them, you don't have to assist them, neither their population. If there is a conflict, the population suffers, and this is the problem of the population. There is no obligation on one side to provide his enemy with water, food, medicine, electricity, oil. And we see that if you feel sorry and feel mercy on the people in Gaza and do provide them with this support, Hamas will take them. Hamas will control it. Hamas will grab it and use it for its own military needs, same way they did with the UNRWA storage places where they sold 24,000 liters of oil. Therefore, the policy should be zero aid to Gaza. President Biden, for its own reasons, requested from Israel to allow to bring a minimal humanitarian support to Gaza, which concludes in medicine and food. Israel, unfortunately, could not refuse. They did negotiate with him, and they brought it to the minimal support. President Biden says that he knows things that he cannot speak about it loudly, and he understands and he feels the heart of the hostages, and yet he has to support the population in Gaza because Hamas does not represent the population in Gaza. We can discuss it. We can really discuss and see who really kidnapped these people. Once Hamas crossed the border and invaded and infiltrated the Jewish communities, the mob from Gaza began to arrive. And there were children, women, men that just went and robbed the communities and kidnapped the people in Gaza. It was not solely done by Hamas terrorists. So if the Hamas the population in Gaza is deeply embedded with the Hamas terrorists, you can't really separate them. More than that, even if you wish to support only the population in Gaza, you can't do it. They are deeply embedded with the terrorists. So there is no way, despite what President Biden thinks, to make sure that the material support, this food and medicine, would not wind up in the hands of Hamas. And yet, as I said, Israel does not have a choice but to let it through.
And by any chance, this war crimes have been committed, not just by the Hamas terrorists, as you mentioned, ordinary people as well, who just came, looted, kidnapped people by the war conventions, by any chance, can they be treated as war criminals?
I hope. I can only hope. According to law, they are war criminals. According to law, they commit crimes against humanity. The one that can charge them for that is the International Criminal Court, and Ratnadeep is planning to go to the International Court to demand issue arrest warrants against these savage and bring them to trial. But now what we need to do is to release the hostages. That's the first thing the international community has to do, has to demand Hamas, has to pressure Hamas, has to pressure all the countries that help Hamas, Egypt, Turkey, Qatar, to demand Hamas to release the hostages immediately. Now, it's a crime against humanity to hold citizens, civilians, babies, women, elderly, when you know that the purpose of them is to torture them. Very soon, God forbid, we'll see pictures, horrible pictures of the kidnaps, of the hostages. They have to be released immediately, not 1 hour later.
Sure, ma'am. And I'm sure that if Qatar actually pushes the envelope a little more, saying they will cut the funding, I'm sure it will not take much time to
Yes. Qatar funds Hamas, Qatar supports Hamas, Qatar holds the leaders of Hamas in its territory. Hamas has a lot of control over, Qatar has a lot of control over Hamas, and they have to demand and they have to pressure Hamas to release the hostages. This is subhuman to hold 200 people in sub conditions in enemy territory. They have to be released immediately.
Sure, ma'am. That's all the questions that I had. So thank you so much, ma'am, for taking your time and speaking to us, and hope this message reaches to a lot of people and understand the gravity of the situation.
Thank you very much. I hope that we see the release of the hostages and we'll see them coming back to their families and home.